there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. I'm here with Sarah today.
Hi!
And we are going to paint a peony. We are going to do a smaller version than what I showed in my blog this morning, but if you are interested in seeing the large painting that was the inspiration for this, I posted that on my blog. It's a painting I did back in 2005, and I had it in the background of some videos last year, and a few people asked for a tutorial, so when I saw the reference photo on Unsplash, I thought it would be, or a very similar one, I thought it would be a really good opportunity to do that project. We're gonna, if you have any questions as we're going along, please type the word question in all caps, and then type your question with normal upper and lowercase letters. That will help catch Sarah's eye when the questions go by. Either a moderator will answer your question, or if it's something new, Sarah will relay it to me. Please keep your questions watercolor related, so the folks watching this back later will have really great information while they're working. This video is brought to you by jerrysartorama.com. They're having their Cyber Week sale this week, so if you are looking to stock up on any products, or if you had your eye on anything, you might want to check there to see if it's on sale. They have the Turner paints on super sale this week. I'm not sure when the sale is ending. I don't know if their Cyber Weekend's on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, but the 18 set of 5 milliliter tubes is on sale for $19.99, so it only goes about that cheap, like once or twice a year. So if you were looking to try those paints, that's what I would recommend. That's such a great deal. The prices get a lot more expensive as you go into the larger tube sets, so you can try it before you spend a lot of money. Do you have anything to add, Sarah?
I don't.
Okay, so we're gonna just jump right in here. I'm still suffering either from the same cold or a new cold, I'm not sure, but I have a big workshop to teach tomorrow in front of 25 people, so I'm gonna try to conserve my voice a bit. So we're just going to jump right in, and what we're going to do is we are going to jump around from petal to petal, and we are just going to make sure we don't paint two adjacent petals next to each other, because we don't want those colors to whoosh into one another. So I'm starting with this big petal here. There is a pattern in the video description under the video if you want to download it, or you could freehand it, and the pattern's a JPEG, so you could resize it however you like. If you want to print it out larger than an 8.5 by 11 print, what you want to do is go into your printer settings and choose poster print, and then you can adjust how big you want it, and you could make it print over several sheets, so you could print it as like a full imperial size watercolor. The colors I'm using are, I'm using quinacridone magenta, which is kind of a mauve color, so if you don't have this, go for a mauve. And I'm using a rose red, which is PV19. It's kind of like a quin rose. And so we actually have two cool reds. You could also use like a violet or something if you didn't have the quin magenta, just something that's got a little cooler of a base that's also very transparent and fresh. We're also going to be using some either permanent yellow, Indian yellow, gambos. You just want a slightly warm yellow, ultramarine, and some either burnt sienna or burnt umber. We probably won't need it that much, but just a little bit if we need to give our colors a little bit more earthiness, like in the centers here. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of the quin magenta and a little bit of ultramarine blue, and I've wet that petal already. So I'm going in with my more intense colors. There's not a lot of glazing here, guys. It's actually painted very directly. And I am going to go in here in the shadowy areas of the petal. These will be the parts of the petal that are kind of deep, kind of coming out of the stem. That would be the lowest parts where the petal's attached, I guess is a better way to say it. I add that in there. So you're going to get some nice contrast between where you have a petal overlapping a petal underneath. So that petal underneath is going to be darker, and then the overlap part will be lighter. You also might want to have a credit card scraper if you want to scrape in veins. I don't think I did that on my original painting. It's still down cellar because it's a very large painting. I'm going to go in with some...
I apologize. This keyboard is very noisy, so everyone can probably hear it over...
I don't know. Is it picking that up?
Yeah, people can hear it.
Oh, well, sorry, guys. I'm right next to the microphone, so you should be able to hear me just fine. And now I'm going to go in with the quin rose up here towards the top and just kind of let the colors meld together. Since the petals are wet underneath, they should have no problem merging. Peonies have a very crepey type of texture to them. So you could press like a, if you wanted to, I mean, this would be something if you had time to let it sit, you could put some like, you could press a plastic bag onto it and let it dry and get some of that crepey texture. Then you would need to go back in and probably add some more shadows and definition, just because stuff would smush around, but that would be a way to do it. I want a little bit of a highlight, so I'm just gonna clean my brush off here, wipe it, and just pull out a little bit of a shadow. And whoever is sending me a message on my phone, it's probably a kid. Is anybody complaining about any technical difficulties?
Not yet.
Okay, good. Because I was just wondering, oh, that could be Val. She sends me messages if something goes terribly wrong. I feel like I want a little more color in there. I think I will do a little scraping because it's such a nice way to quickly add some detail. Anywhere you get an overlapping petal, try to get a little bit of that darker color underneath.
What brush are you using right now? We had somebody ask about the brush you're using.
Oh, okay. This one is this is actually one that's not available on the American market. I recommend the Mimic ones, but they're in my studio downstairs, and I didn't grab them up here. I have so many duplicates, so I didn't buy a separate set of the Mimics to come upstairs. But this is a number 10 round synthetic. I'm gonna grab a credit card scraper here and just. This is the brush I actually have is one of the Renaissance. So you get a really nice fine little bit of line work there with your credit card scraper, which is handy. So now I'm going to, I think I'll just pop over here and paint this one. Now if you have a smaller area, you don't need to wet the area first. Just make sure that you have enough water in your paints, because the less water on the paper, the less shift you're going to have. So if you're not adding water to your paper first, and you're not adding enough water to your paint, your color might be a lot darker on those areas you didn't pre-wet. And I want a little of that purpley color in there. If you want a less distinct line, just be gentle when you scrape. Ooh, I just saw Tally run across the backyard. I'm keeping my eyes on in case that we have a bad neighbor cat that likes to terrorize her.
Oh.
Took off running, but you know what? I think she was actually running after something she wanted to terrorize, so.
Yeah, she's probably trying to catch something.
Yeah, I think so. So again, I'm not pre-wetting over here because I do want this paint to be fairly dark. And I'm using the rose red. I might add a little bit of yellow to this, because it's, I think I want a little bit less pink in here. Plus, we have the yellow stamens, and they're going to reflect onto the pink. So we want to make sure we get that color in there right off the bat. And that's going to give you more of a red, a corally color. I'm going to go in and add that right in there. Just kind of blend it in with that color by touching it. Touching the wet brush to the wet paint. Just kind of keep in mind what's surrounding the objects you're painting, where there'll be reflected color, where the colors will kind of optically mix, because you have a reflection of one color on top of another color, making this appear more coral or red rather than purpley pink. And I'm going to scoot over here a little bit. I see that I should have had that separated a little bit, and I'm just sketching that in with my pen, my brush rather, and I'm going to fill that in with that same color. If your brush has a nice point on it, you can do the whole thing with a number 10 round. What are you saying about over there, Sarah?
The keyboard sounds.
Oh, you know what, Sarah? There's another keyboard that's hooked in. You don't even need to unplug it just to pull out the keyboard tray. That keyboard is much quieter.
Oh, that's much better.
Yeah, because
this is a very nice keyboard, but it's so noisy.
Yeah, that's Jackson's gaming keyboard. So we've got two keyboards hooked up to that computer.
This is much better. Ah, the old Old classic keyboard.
Old Faithful, yeah.
That's right. I'll take Old Faithful.
I like that one better too, but everybody else likes the other one better. But I think the keys are too high on the gaming keyboard. I feel like
it's strictly noise. If you could mute the keyboard,
yeah,
it would be fine. But it's the clicky, clicky, clicky.
I feel like the keys are high, but that might just be because I don't know how to type. So
no, the keys are definitely high, which is fine. It's the noise.
I'm grabbing some of this color that's got the yellow in it and watering it down, and I'm going to add it to the top here. Now, if you're doing this painting really large, like the example I showed on my blog, I would pre-wet each petal. But on this painting here, I'm working like 6x9 on a piece of Aqua Bee paper, the paper I typically use for my practice pieces. And I really don't need to pre-wet anything just because you can get around so fast. I'm going to do just a drop of that purpley mix, which was the magenta and ultramarine, like I had there, just so that the petals don't feel out of whack from one another. You want to have a little bit of cross-pollination between those colors as you go. Up here, we'll do this one next. I'm going to start off with that darker color again, the magenta and the ultramarine, and that's going to go kind of down here in this deep area of the petal where it would be really shadowy. Grab some of the rose red on its own. And I don't think I'll have any yellow in this one. And I'll apply this over here and I'll let the colors just kind of merge. I did tape down my paper not because I thought it would wrinkle too much, but because I would get a nice pretty white border. It might wrinkle a little bit, but we're just doing section by section. Oftentimes it doesn't really make your paper wrinkle because you're not soaking the whole thing.
Ian Jackson, are you thinking carefully about the pinks and purples you use in this paint with regards to light, fast colors?
It's so funny, Ian. I actually considered that. I was thinking about that this morning because when I took my painting out of the frame to photograph it, and also because it had really slipped in the frame, and I was seeing something behind the painting. I'm like, did I put two paintings in this? Because when I was younger, I'd conserve frames and just kind of throw another painting in there. And I was actually just whatever artwork came. I bought a frame like a cheap print in it, and I actually just reused it, and I stuck the print behind it as like an acid-free buffer. But anyway, no, there was no fading. So like the edges that were covered by the matte, there was no difference in color, and that's because I used quinacridone colors. Quinacridone colors gives you that bright punch that it looks like it would be fugitive, but quinacridones stand the test of time. That painting hung in my living room for over 10 years in fairly direct sunlight, because my living room gets a lot of sun and not a single bit of fading. That was M. Graham paint that I had used on that piece. Jerry's also sells M. Graham if you're looking for that. I don't know how long. I mean, I haven't had any issues with the Turner's fading either. But yeah, that definitely, I was very impressed, and I was just like, oh, I got to remember that. That was M. Graham paint. But they're all quinacridones. I use dioxazine violet. I use quinacridone red. I think it might have been the permanent alizarin crimson, which is a quinacridone color. And I didn't have any issues. And then, of course, I think I actually used New Gamboge and Burnt Sienna. And colors stayed beautifully. So, your quinacridones are really, really tried and true colors. Grabbing a little bit of that color with a little yellow in it to go along this side. This is kind of an area where you've got, I can show you here, I got my reference photo, where you've got this really bright tip of a petal, then you've got the inside, the gully that's really deeper and darker, then you've got another petal coming out in front of that. So what I'm painting here is just that little gully in there, and I'm exaggerating the shadow a little bit. But once we paint that petal, it's not going to feel as exaggerated as it does right now.
Elizabeth Jensen, do you find that there is a right and wrong side to the Aqua Bee paper?
No, I think it's more what texture you prefer. But you can paint on either texture. I think one side is a little bit more rough, and the other side is a little bit more of a continuous. I don't know if it's a texture that was against a screen, like maybe one was against a felt and one was against something else. I'm not sure. But they paint both fine. I think it just depends on the texture that you prefer. Some papers are single-sided. They don't have sizing on the back side, but not many. Most you can kind of just use the one you like better. That's real light in this corner. I'm just going to fill in this area here. So notice you want to keep skipping around. And my lines are darker so that you can see them. You don't need to draw that darkly. Oh, I was just using the Cancer Wind Power, and I was having a lot of fun with that. That has two different textures too, but I found both sides paint really well. So if you are looking for a paper that's very inexpensive, that has two distinct textures, that's a nice one to experiment with. Now, if you get too dark on something, you can just blot it with a paper towel, or just clean your brush off and wipe out what you don't need. I don't think that's too dark, but it's darker than I intended when I started that, but I think that's a little bit more accurate actually. Okay, let's see. Is that one dry? That one's still damp, so we're going to come over here. Let's do this section right here. As you're getting away from the center, I feel like there's less contrast on the petals. And the watercolor palette I'm using is just the tin that the core watercolors come in. I really enjoy those tins. And I store my half pans. I have my Turner, my Rembrandt, and my Da Vinci half pans in here with magnets on the bottom. Those tins are great. All the smaller sets used to come in these really big tins, but they switched it. I think too many artists were complaining about the wasted space, like of having this big tin for just like 5 or 6 little tubes. But I really thought that was a great design. If you get the bigger sets, they come with that. And you can also find that at Jerry's Artorama. They've got everything. This is too light, but I got too much water in there, so I'm just kind of drinking up some of that water with my brush. And we're going to put it back in. We're going to put the paint back in. So this actually, I'm seeing more dark next to the top of this petal, which will give us a really nice contrast when we paint the outer side, and it's a little bit lighter. And then I also do see some contrast here down at the bottom where it's kind of deep into the crevices of the flower. Hopefully my hand's not in the way. Sorry about that. I should probably, let me prop this up a little bit. I think that will be a little bit easier for me to paint and not get my hand in the way.
Paulage One Art, what do you think of the Lucy image tool for outlining watercolor paintings? Do you have one?
I don't have one. I saw an ad for that on a video, and so I clicked over because I was curious about it. It looks like it's a neat idea, like the old camera Lucindas that the Renaissance artists used. I did receive an etcher product to review, and it's a similar idea. It's got this like glass piece that you put up next to your cell phone, and it has an app that I need to download. But it makes it so you could project, like you could have an image on your cell phone, and this is a piece of glass, and then it reflects it or projects it onto your paper. I haven't used it yet. It's in my pile of things to review for the holidays. So I'll try that and let you know. I'm not sure how much it costs. I know the thing I can't remember the name of it, but you just mentioned it. I think that's around $119. And it's kind of like a overhead projector-y looking thing. But no, I haven't used it. If anybody has, I'd love to hear about it. So please let us know in the comments if you have used it, so Sarah can tell me what you guys think, because it's interesting looking. Let's see. I'm gonna go to this one now. Don't worry if you get little blossoms, because I think it'll add to our texture later. Let's see, what one I was going to do. That one right there. Painting it in with a pretty much mid-value rose red. And I think I'm going to add a little bit of the purpley color. Here it's a little darker. Alright, we could skip back there in that corner. We've got More of that purple color. Oop, too much water. You might want to switch to a smaller brush if you're getting more water than you want to be dealing with.
Ian Jackson, did you get to test the Arteza 100% cotton paper?
Some is arriving today, actually. I believe, just from their description on their website, I think that they are made by either Hannah Mule for one and Milford for the other. So I think they're actually a really high quality paper. And I do have those versions of. I do have some Milford and some Cezanne, Hannah Mule Cezanne, which I think is what it is. So I will be testing and comparing that shortly. I have a few reviews to get done, so it might be a couple of weeks, but yeah, it's on the radar. Arteza does a good job of choosing products that are really good quality and usually pretty darn affordable. Okay, I'm just looking around to see if there's any of the darker passages I want to get in. I'm also going to take a look at my picture. I'm seeing that I've got a few, now that I have this tipped up, you can really see where blossoms will form. And I can see right here, I've got a puddle, so I dried my brush off, just stuck that in there. I'm going to do the same right there. And that way, I won't get any blossoms where I don't want them. But if they happen, I'm not going to worry about them. So I did the scraping there because that's an outside of a petal and you'll see the veining. Most of these pieces that we've painted so far are insides and you wouldn't really see the veining in that because it was too dark and shadowy. So now what we're going to be painting is the outsides of petals, and those will be a little bit lighter and fresher of color. They'll be mostly the rose red, maybe with some of the magenta. Not too many will have the purpley color in it. And some will have a little bit of a yellow in it, depending on where we are. We're going to have lighter, the tips of the petals are going to be the lightest and a little bit lighter towards the center. So I'm going to start off, I think I can start with this one right here. Seems fairly close to the dry edge. And I'm just going in with this fairly watery wash.
Joe Maskey, another on the big painting. Do you remember if you used big rounds or flats? And did you still go one petal at a time like this or broader washes?
I did, I used big rounds, and I actually think I started with a wash that was like the lightest shade, and then I went in with the darks. But having that wash dry in time, I don't think I would have had time to let it dry doing the live show, so I did switch that up a little bit. I did because I did the wash and then I still went in and did petal by petal, it was a little bit redundant. It would have been way redundant on a small painting, not so redundant on a big painting because it could save you some time, because you wouldn't need to paint every single petal. But on a smaller painting, I think it would have been quite redundant. So now I'm going in with just the Quin Rose on its own on the tip of the brush, and I'm just kind of flicking in some really, really scant lines to kind of give it the impression of this texture on these petals. And also it gives it a little bit of shading. Grab a little bit of the magenta because I want to have a nice contrast between this petal and the petal that's overlapping it. And then I'm going to go in with my credit card scraper and throw in a few veins. All right, now we'll go over to this one here. I'm going to start a little bit darker here and then just add water to my brush and spread it around. Wipe off the excess, grab a little more paint, and just kind of, again, flick up some lines. I grab a little bit of that purpley color just so that one doesn't seem to be a lone weirdo petal. again, we're going to do some scraping. And I feel like I want to blot a little bit. Just feels a little stiff there. Maybe even brush over it a little bit. I feel like it's too harsh here, not harsh enough up there. There, I like that a little bit better. And let's see, we can go and do this piece over here. This one is has a little bit more variety in color, so I'm going to go in with this magenta color. It's magenta, rose red, and some of the ultramarine blue. And I'm going to add this into the areas right next to where there are petals overlapping. You really want to make sure that you're looking for shadows to make sure that you have a little bit of contrast here and there. Grab some of the rose red. Could also use quinacridone rose or permanent rose. And then I am just going to clean my brush, blot it. Doesn't have to be perfectly clean. And you don't want to have a ton of water in there. You just want it damp so that you can just kind of spread what's left. I just kind of spread the edge of the color there up into the edge of the petal.
We have Otto and Denise in the chat. They both say hello.
Oh, hi! They have very interesting YouTube channels for watercolorists. Highly recommend checking them out. Oftentimes you can click on somebody's name, and I think you can even subscribe right from clicking on somebody's name, I think. Especially,
I believe you can, yes.
I think so. Especially if they're, it might be only if they're moderators, but they both are, so I believe they both are. I know Denise is.
I don't know.
Actually, Otto might not be, but
he's not. But I think if you click on his name on his little profile.
Oh, she. It's a.
She. Sorry. You can. I think it takes you right to.
Yeah, probably so.
Their page, their channel.
Probably so.
I can't talk today.
And they both have very pleasant voices to like listen to when you're like tidying up, or maybe you're painting and you want to like kind of feed your brain while you're working. All right, we're gonna go in again with some of that magenta with the ultramarine right on the edge of this petal over here. Get our contrast in. Grab a little bit of a mix of the red rose and that magenta color for right above it. Then some magenta on its own to warm it up. I mean, quin rose on its own. And then a little bit of the yellow and rose red there for the edge. I'm going to add a little bit more of the darker color in there because I feel like I'm going to do magenta and the rose red and a little ultramarine blue without much water because I feel like I just lost all of my shadow when I was blending. And just kind of drag some of that color up. Make sure you go with the direction of the petal, the way it would be curving. The right direction of the veins. And then do a little scraping in there so you have a little bit of distinct veining. And after you scrape the veins, if you do find it's too dark, you can blot and your veins will remain on the paper. And that can give you that crepey texture as well that's really indicative of a peony flower. Alright, we'll go to this one over here because that one's not touching anything wet. And we'll start in our little kind of mix that's got a little bit of all three of those colors. That's really quite a light petal. Do a little bit of a darker mix. And at the back, just with less water. Do some scraping. The scraping, if you want to have dark lines, you want to scrape immediately after you put the color in. And that will give you a more distinct line. Just blotted my brush so I could spread that color a little bit without adding extra water. And then pull the highlight back by just taking a nearly dry brush and whisking it away. All right. So if you're not sure if a petal is dry or wet, just kind of make sure your hands are clean. Touch the back or the side of your hand to the paper, and you'll be able to tell whether the paper is dry, because if it feels cool, then it's still wet. If it feels room temperature, then it's dry. I'm going to go right into the center here. I'm actually going to do a wash of permanent yellow. Right on the dry paper, because it's just easier to get this yellow painted in and then go around, then just go in and paint our shadows where they need to be. So fill that area right in. There are a couple little pink petals in there. I'm going to go around, but if you don't go around them, you could still paint over them. It's not the end of the world. You'll just have a crisper color if you go around them. And that gives us a nice focal point. How many people do we have painting with us today?
We have 305 watching.
Oh, nice. I know a lot of people paint later so they can chat while it's live. It's fun to visit. Now, while this is still wet, I'm going to mix up kind of like a golden orangey color. I'm going to take some of the rose red, clean and dry my brush so I don't get too much water in there. I'm going to take some of the yellow and get this nice kind of orangey golden color here. And I'm just going to tap it in, like stipple it in. I'm going to grab some burnt umber. Burnt sienna is fine. We don't have burnt umber. And I'm going to tap some of that in as well. I don't have a lot of water on my brush, so it's not going to travel too far. And that's going to help us with the texture, and it's going to save us from having to do too much with the second layer. In fact, you might not need to do anything with the second layer because this is staying put pretty well.
People are snacking now and painting later, it seems like.
Oh, good idea.
There are a lot of people who are eating while they're watching this.
Oh, I should have painted food. I should have painted a cupcake or something.
No, people were very excited about the peony.
Oh, good. All right. I'm actually going to see if I can go ahead and get my darkest darks in here because my paint is behaving really well. I'm going to grab ultramarine blue, really thick. I'm going to grab some more of the burnt umber, so they're going to come together and cancel each other out, make almost like a black. And I'm going to add that to the center around those pink flowers. My mother has the most gorgeous peonies growing in her backyard. My sister can grow them too. They have so much sun. They live on top of a hill. And,
yeah.
Oh, it's so pretty. I love those flowers.
Yeah, they are a favorite.
It's such a bummer when, like, the rain comes. It always seems to be some huge rainstorm right after they bloom, and they all get, like, knocked over a couple days after they come along.
Well, usually you have to put, when they get real big, you have to put cages around them, and that will help them not droop and fall over.
That's a good idea. I don't think my mother does that.
Yeah, no, well, that's what happened to mine this year, because for whatever reason this summer, they just got way bigger. They just had a sudden growth spurt. So the cage they had weren't big enough, weren't tall enough, so they did actually fall over, so I'm going to have to get some tomato cages for them for next year, so that they don't just collapse over like they did this year.
They're so pretty. It's such a bummer to see them falling over. And we're just going to go through and pick away at some of these smaller petals. There's some subtle little veining in there. The lighter the petal, the less noticeable the veining is going to be. So don't worry, it's going to be nice and subtle. We'll skip over to that one there. You're going to notice on a lot of these, you're going to have a big contrast. Their petals are almost bleached out white at the tips, and they're just kind of like a pale, very fresh pink towards the back sides of them where they're growing out of the flower. But since they overlap so closely, you're not going to see as much of a shadow as you did on these bigger sections where the petals were split apart a little bit, where there was a little bit more of a gap in between them. But that's alright, because you want that contrast. You don't want all of the petals to be the same, or it would be very boring. We've got a lot of repetitive petals here, so anything that's going to keep them a little bit different from one another is good. I'll lift out a little bit of that. It's too uniform. On this petal, we're going to have a little bit of that yellow again. The petals they're kind of translucent, so I think that's how we're getting the yellow in here. We're seeing the translucence. So I got the yellow and red mixed up here. I'm going to throw that in there. And then go with the rose red down towards the bottom of the petal. Another thing about having, especially if you had darker pencil lines, if you have that nice contrast against that pencil line, the pencil line will kind of disappear. And it's okay to leave the edge of that almost white. Alright, moving right along, we'll go to this guy over here because I think everything's dry next to him. Now if you are on a bigger petal, it's perfectly fine to wet the petal first. It'll just help everything kind of blend a little bit. We'll start in with our rose red, pick up a little bit of that magenta off the palette, and trace along the edges because we want this to be darker than the two petals that are overlapping it. So that can also help you be a guide as to how dark to go with your petal. It should be a little bit darker than what is overlapping it. Because all these petals come from the same flower. Light can interact differently on them, but you want to have that little bit of drama there. Cleaning, blotting, and spreading my pigment. I'm going to use some of the rose red on its own with quite a bit of water, because that's a little bit warmer than the mix with the magenta. And I'm going to add a little bit of that yellow in there. Just enough so it gives you more of a rosy peach color instead of a bright pink. It's very subtle. And scripping some veins. And the paper has to be wet for the veins to be pronounced. Now I feel like I need a little bit more pigment in there. I'm going to go with the rose on its own. My brush is just damp. It's not very wet, so it's going to keep my paint from spreading crazily everywhere. You're just going to let me put a little bit in there selectively.
JLT 110. What side is the proper side for painting on Aquabee cotton?
Whichever side you like. I prefer the side that does not look as uniform. If you look at the paper, you'll see that that one side has a more uniform texture, almost like you can see whatever screen was against it to make it, and then the other side is a little bit more natural looking. I like to use a more natural looking side, but it's completely up to you. You can paint on both sides.
Sarah Morton Williams. I never managed to get a light enough wash even when I don't think I have too much paint. Any suggestions?
Wetting your paper first. That'll be lighter when it dries. And being patient, like let it dry and see what you have. I think that needs to be warmer still. I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow and just kind of glaze it in there. It's going to mix, it's going to blend because it's not dry, so it's not a real glaze, but it can help me just shift the tone and temperature of that color a little bit. I think a lot of times people don't account for the shift when it dries, and then they end up going way too light, or they go too dark. They think they're going too dark and they freak out and they blot it away before they get to see if it's right or not. Okay, that petal is a little bit more veiny than I wanted. I think I'm just gonna blot it and then add a little more paint in there, less juicy. And we'll let that dry and see how it turned out. Okay, we'll go to this one next. This one has kind of just an all over tone of this, it's like the magenta, a little bit of ultramarine blue. So I'm just gonna wash that in really lightly. Just go a little bit darker where it's right next to the petal, it's overlapping it. So I do need to grab some fresh paint for that, so I don't have too much water there. And that's just going to go in right here towards the bottom next to the overlapping petals. Just flick up some color. Adding in some of the rose so it's not too purple. I'm just going to scrape in some veins. You can always do the veins as line work later if you don't like the scraping. And as you look around, you may see, now that you have some of the overlapping petals in, like I'm looking, oh, that should be a little bit darker. And you could kind of pick around after everything's dry and you can add in some of those other details. And now over here, I'm just going to see if, yep, that's dry. This is just one petal that's kind of folded over kind of strangely. So we're going to treat that all as one petal. And because it is such a large area, I'm just going to gently dampen it. You don't have to go right up to the edge. I like to go right up to the edge of the paint just because it's a little bit easier to see where I'm going. And this, it has a little bit of the magenta, but it's mostly the rose red. So with the brush that's got a little bit more magenta, I just added some magenta to it. I'm going to go right up here against the petal that is overlapping and get that nice contrast in right off the bat. These kind of little dents and folds in this this flower petal, so I just want to get that in there. Clean my brush, blot it off. I need to get a new paper towel. When your paper towel starts looking like this and it's wet and spongy, it's time to get a new one. And I'll just kind of soften the edges, which is easy to do because I wet the paper first. These colors are staining, so if I put that right down on dry paper, I might not be able to move it. My brush gets too saturated with color, I'll just blot it off. Just go in and fiddle with those edges a little bit. Because this one, we've got this cupping over petal, so this side that's a kind of a crevice. This side is lighter because it's coming up over this indent, and then you have a light on either side of that crevice there. So it can be a little confusing when you get to petals like that where you're where you're seeing kind of two overlapping edges. I'm just trying not to make it all one uniform petal, so I'm just rinsing my brush and just coaxing the pigment where I want it to go. And I don't want to do a lot of scraping, but I do want to have a little bit in there because I have done it around this area, and I'm just very, very gently throwing in a few veins. But this is a very soft looking petal, so I don't want to overdo that. And I think we can move, let's see, oh, that one's still wet. Let's see, we just painted that one. We got this area here. This is super light, so doesn't really need a lot of work, just a little really pale color there. Put a little bit of yellow in there, actually. Okay, this one over here, same thing. A little more pink in there, but not much. Same thing right here. A little bit darker towards the back side of it. And here, this is actually, let's see, is that all one petal? This is a petal kind of folding back, so it's going to start off, actually no it's not, this is the outside of that petal, that's the inside, that's the outside of the petal, so this is going to be just really pale. Have a little bit of yellow towards the edge. And a little pink on the back side of it, giving us some contrast over that one that's folding over. I've got too much water on my brush, so I'm blotting it off, just drying that brush off. And going back in for some more paint with less water.
Joe P., do you have any watercolor challenges?
I don't, but World Watercolor Month does a challenge every month. They have like a list of prompts.
They meant like a challenge when you do a painting, like is there something
I thought they meant like
challenging? No, not an actual challenge.
I know, like a challenge blog. Let's see. I think it's important to always challenge yourself. So, let's see. Any in particular challenges? I don't know. I just finished up taking a class on watercolor figures. And like working large, doing like in large paintings that had a lot of like skin on them, that was a little challenging to like get smooth blends. I don't know. There's some things I don't like to do. I mean, that I can do, but I prefer not to. Like I don't like to paint the same painting many times, which is what a lot of artists do to improve. Gee, that sounds really. I don't mean that to sound conceited, but I'm not drawing a blank here.
JLT 110. I store my full-size sheets of paper in a bag in the furnace room. Is there worry about it getting too dry?
No, I wouldn't worry about it getting too dry. I'd worry about it getting too damp if there was any dampness. But dry is usually good for watercolor paper. I store mine in a like a wooden chest under my bed in their original bags. Let's make sure it's not too close to the furnace. We don't want a fire hazard. This one has this half moon shape here just to kind of show where the petal is folding over itself. And I'm going to put a little bit of purple there towards the bottom, ultramarine blue and the magenta, just to give it a little bit of definition. Alright, this area here is just going to be really, that one's going to be really pale with a little bit of yellow. And same back here in this corner. And this one here is, it's a shadow, but it's got some yellow in it, so it's kind of your rose and yellow.
Someone's asking the size of the paper you're using today.
6 by 9. This would be a fun one to do larger, but I just, for time constraints, I'm doing it this size. I'm using the Aqua Bee. And I'm just adding some of the that red on its own. And when I'm getting into a corner like this, what I like to do is actually drag the dark shadow colors out a little bit on top of the adjacent petal. Like if I've got one edge that's kind of like going over several petals, I will pull that color out, and it just helps kind of weave all of these pieces together.
Jessica Bear, I would like to do a large scale one. Do you approach a large scale painting differently than a smaller one, such as larger brushes, different process, paper size? Would you stretch a larger piece of paper or use 300 pound?
If I was doing a full sheet, I probably would stretch it, and I don't do anything fancy. I just wet it and use gummed paper tape on a big like masonite board. But if you're 300 pound, just tape it down. And it depends, it depends on how wet you're going to get the paper. If you're going to start it all with like a unifying wash, then you probably would want to stretch it if you're using a full imperial sheet, which is 22 inches by 30 inches. But if you're doing like a quarter sheet, which is like a 15 by 14 by 11, then I wouldn't bother stretching that. But yeah, I would just use larger brushes. You want to have brushes that are going to be in, relative size to the painting. Like this brush here is it's called a medium Menta, but I would say it's probably around a size 30 round. That would be a great one to use. If you're doing just an all over unifying wash, I'd probably just use like a 2 or 3 inch wide Skyflow brush and just give it that, give it a nice pale kind of pink wash, or whatever you see, coral, whatever you're seeing as the color of your peony that you want to, that would go on every petal. And that just helps everything kind of look like it goes with one another. And then I would still approach it petal by petal and do what I'm doing here. Because you have so much square footage to cover, by doing unifying wash, if you have like a little smidgen that you didn't hit, it's not going to look like you need to go in and it's going to look finished sooner, so you won't have to do quite so much work. I would do that wash, just let that wash dry before you attempt doing any work. Going in with some real a dry brush with some dry paint just to give a little bit of texture to this petal. And you can do a little veining. You don't need too much because we just painted in a few streaks. This in here is going to be darker, so let's do the magenta and the rose red. We'll add a little bit of yellow because we are getting close to that center where we're getting the reflections. Try not to add too much water. If you want to go in with that color, you can go around some of the little, just kind of do some wiggly lines, and that's just going to help you, help the person looking at this painting say, oh, okay, like I can see that yellow, that yellow center, but I can see that there's also petals underneath it. So when you just kind of go in there with that thick paint on the tip of your brush, you could just kind of go in and draw some of those shapes, and it just helps it not feel like you've got this whole separate yellow thing in the middle. It actually is just overlapping. But you don't need to paint in every single yellow stamen or whatever those are. I'm so bad at plant names, parts of plant names. Okay, we just have a few lighter pieces to put in, and I'm noticing on some of these, especially over here, there's actually kind of like a bluish. A lot of times outdoor light has a blue undertone, so I'm just really going to water down. I'm going to clean my brush off a little better because that's very purple. I'm going to grab some of that ultramarine blue and water it down, and maybe just a smidgen of the burnt umber just to gray it, so I get this kind of like gray blue color on my brush. You can see there on my paper towel the color that I have, and I've blotted the excess water off, and I'm just going to go in and add that to the edges of some of these petals, those overturned ones that haven't been painted yet. Now if you didn't unifying wash, I probably wouldn't have a unifying wash with yellow in it, because then if you're going to tint some of these with a little bit of blue, it's going to look really weird. It's going to get a little muddy on you. There, so that just kind of gives you a little bit of natural light. And any of these petals that aren't really tiny, that feel like they need a little more color, you can go in and add a little bit of that magenta color, and then scrape in some veins. And small petals like this, you can just pop right around, jump right around and do them. You don't need to do them all one at a time, because they're so small. You can like easily jump around and get them all done. Now there's a couple little pink petals in the center that we're going to want to do. I'm just going to pick up the rose red on its own, and they're pretty dark, so I'm just going to go right in and paint them in. And at this stage, we're going to go through, we're going to look and see what needs some definition, and switch to a smaller brush so that we can just kind of go in and pick away at those little details, and then we'll be done. Let's see, what am I going to use? Any small brush. A liner would be nice because it will hold more paint. Oh yeah, get a liner. What are you laughing at?
All your brushes.
Most of my brushes are downstairs. I only have a couple little jars of brushes up here.
I know.
Sad selection of brushes up here. My favorites are down on my table, my mimics. I should just have two sets and have one up here and one downstairs.
You should. What kind of artist are you, Lindsay?
Seriously.
Gosh. You're a beginner?
I'm not a minimalist, I'll tell you that. Not a minimalist artist. I could kind of fake minimalism in other areas of my life, but not in the art supply. Okay. So then I'll just go through. I really like to enhance edges, the edges where there's contrast and there's overlap. So, like I was mentioning here, dragging that color into this petal, I could take some of this magenta and I can drag it into the petal, the next petal. So keeping some of those lines nice and crisp and continuous can help. I'll do like a little line, like a little bead of color, and then I'll just wisp up some veins. You can enhance any areas you think just need a little bit of extra shading. If you're going over a petal like this, just make sure it's dry so you don't end up getting too much. You don't end up lifting a semi-dry wash and then getting a muddy, yucky mess. Actually, that brush is too floppy to do that with. The liner is great for dragging the lines out, but if you're trying to fill in an area or add a glaze, it's not ideal. Go back in with this liner and pull that line up through so you get a little connection there. You can make the line with a liner, get that nice connection to Unify petals, and then go in with a slightly bigger brush and just kind of soften off that edge so the shadow kind of bleeds up into the petal and is really lovely. This one over here with the pretty folds, I kind of want to do a little bit with this. I always start off one of these paintings like, oh yeah, this was going to take me 45 minutes, and I look up at the clock, it's like an hour later. We'll be done in just a couple minutes here. So if you have any questions, make sure you get them into Sarah so she can ask me, or you'll have to wait and you can put it in the comments below if you're watching the replay. And I do check in a couple times a day on the comments. I try to anyway.
And also Facebook page, even if Lindsay doesn't answer directly, a lot of our mods are part of it. And we have a lot of people on the Facebook page that can be super helpful with advice or questions.
Yes, and Joey Maskey's Facebook group, the live show Frugalites, that's an excellent one. There's always somebody in the group doing something fabulous and helping others out, and that's a wonderful group. I like to unify these lines wherever I can. I think it really makes it feel cohesive, so it's not just like a bunch of random petals. And of course, if you wanted to, you could go in with another media. You could go in with pastel or color pencil, or anything else that you feel would enhance your picture more. It's your artwork. You can do whatever you like. Sometimes just taking a break and coming back to it in an hour or so will help you resolve any issues that you're having, because you've gotten a chance to see it with fresh eyes. This is the British two-brush method, when you go in with one color on a brush and then you grab another brush to spread it out. It's really handy. And at this point, I mean, I'm not even really looking at the reference photo. I'm more looking at my painting and seeing what is going to make the painting a little bit stronger and a little bit more interesting. But I think at this point, you've learned all the techniques to do this painting in whatever size you want to do it. So I'm going to take the tape off and we can see how it ended up looking. If you have any questions, make sure you put them in the chat right now if you want them answered live. Otherwise, you can leave them in the comments afterwards.
I think we're all caught up.
If you ever find your masking tape sticking on you, if it wants to rip your paper, just heat it up with a hairdryer or a heat tool, and that will loosen the adhesive so that the tape will come off cleanly. So I just get the cheapo tape of the Dollar Tree, and sometimes you'll get a real sticky batch, and then other times it's totally low tack, which is what I like. And there, I'll hold it up to the camera a little bit closer. There is our finished picture. I hope everybody had a good time painting along today. We're all set with questions, right?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for putting up with my nasally voice. That's my stuffed up nose and everything. I have all the supplies we used in the video description if you want to check them out. Please visit our sponsor, jerrysartorama.com, for any of the supplies we used today. I thank them for their support, and they are having their Cyber Week sale. Don't know if it ends today, tomorrow, or Sunday, so if you are looking for something, I'd go have a look, and you might be able to get an awesome deal on it. Their prices are great anyway, but they do like this thing called a super sale, or like these, like the Turner paints are usually on sale for $30. And then their, I think the list price is like, It's crazy. It's over $100. And then they do the Jerry's sale for like $29, but then the super sale is $19. So I think it's kind of like the gateway drug because these paints are pretty awesome. So you kind of get introduced at a low price, and then you can go back and buy the bigger tubes of other colors that you want. But it's just a great bargain if you're looking to try some artist quality paints and you don't want to spend an arm and a leg, or you're looking for a gift for somebody and you know they want to get into getting good paints and get them started off on the right foot. So you have anything to add, Sarah?
I don't.
Okay, well, thank you so much for watching, guys. We'll see you next week. Until next time, happy crafting.